Good morning, Caroline. Caroline is dropping in this morning. Caroline's take on how to position our unfair advantage would be a wonderful way to kick us all off so that we're thinking about this in a strategic and resourceful way. So Caroline, are you all right if I hand over to you to tell us how you look at that, and especially in light of when people are asking for investment or when you're advising on a marketing perspective, how our cohort can look at their unfair advantage?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. It's usually both a company question and a resource question. So on the company side, it's you think about branding 101, which is what does your brand communicate that differentiates you from everyone else? So if you're providing consulting services, what is different? What is the one thing about your consulting services that's different? Is it the hands-on consultative nature of your approach, or is it the level of service you provide? And from a branding perspective, you want to put an undue focus on that one thing or those two things, and it's not five things, it's one or two that make you different, because you have to see it from the customer's perspective. For them, I'm just going to use consulting for lack of a better example, but from their perspective, all consultants are the same, and assume that they're starting with a view that I can't tell the difference. You're all the same. And you certainly don't want them to shop on price, because that's not usually the basis for a long-term sustainable business relationship. So you have to really put an undue focus on what makes you different, and that has to be memorable in the eyes of the customer. So that's one approach, I would say, from a company perspective. Think of yourself as a brand, think of your company as a brand, and magnify the one thing that makes you a standout compared to everybody else. And if you're in a pitch, that's got to be like 50% of your presentation. And the rest of it is, oh yeah, and we do all those other things that everybody else does. And make sure, of course, to include those, because they're going to compare apples to apples. But remember that ultimately, if they remember one thing about your company, that needs to be communicated loud and clear. From a resource perspective, and it depends what kind of company you are and at what scale you are. But think of yourself, if you are a resource replacement, and again, I'm going to use consulting as an example. In many companies, they are hiring you to do something that, if they had the right number of resources, the right level of investment, the right scale, they might be able to do it themselves. They might hire employees to do it. That's not true for every business, but for many of the capabilities that a company is buying from you, if they thought it was core to their business, they might do it themselves. So you are also, when you're pitching, convincing them somewhat that they would pick you versus bringing it in-house and doing it themselves. And there's this often unfair perception that it's going to be better, faster, cheaper if they manage it themselves, which is, of course, not always the case. So it's always useful as a double check to think about yourself as a resource and say, am I playing up my most constrained asset? The asset, I'm going to stay with consulting. You have a dozen assets. You're good at a bunch of things. You're good at client management. You're good at negotiations. You're good at partner contracts. You're good at financial models. You're good at data and analytics. You're good at a bunch of things. But some of those things are in very high demand and hard for the client to get externally. And some of those things, frankly, are more attainable. So I'll use data and analytics as an example. Even if the client is good at data and analytics, we know there is a dearth of talent out there, and it's highly competitive to get that talent. And so while you might be good at consulting and partner management and all those other things, if you're good at data and analytics, that's what you play up. That's your number one storyline, because they can't get that other places, or it'll be hard for them to replace it internally. And I think that's useful. I mean, I give that coaching to people, even people who are going to write their resume, to look for a job, I always say, what of your assets, of which you have many skills and capabilities, what of those assets are a constrained resource? There's not much out there in the market. It's hard to find, it's expensive, and it's competitive. And if, staying with the data and analytics example, if you're good at data and analytics, my advice, I say in marketing, in my field in marketing, when I coach anybody who has a marketing background, digital and data. If you're good at either of those two things, represent yourself as doing everything, or the bevy of services and capabilities you have, but data and digital is a constrained asset, not readily available. That's what you're going to speak about. So that would be my advice, is those two perspectives, the resource perspective and the brand perspective, are good filters as you think about what's special about you.
I think that's the perfect way to set up this session. And again, if you take on board what she's saying, when you think about the opportunities and your strengths, you want those things to then match up. What are those big things that you're going for, the things that you've seen in the market? And then what in your skill set uniquely positions you to be able to do that?
And it's so tempting. My word of caution, it's so tempting to give a laundry list of everything. We all do it. And you need a good editor. It would be my last bit of advice. You need somebody to say, yeah, but aren't there other people who do that?